Hello everyone and welcome. Make a cup of your favorite drink and get comfortable because this is a wonderful time for news stories from YellowCat. Send your own stories in the comments below and maybe they'll be in our new video. Today we have new amazing stories, so subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. Let's get started. Which unpleasant customer received the best quick karma that you have witnessed? It wasn't the customer, it was the manager. She was horrible. She was impolite, deliberately made exceptions for individuals she didn't like, picked out favorites and gave them presents in front of everyone, even though they tried to avoid her, purposefully messed up plans for people she didn't like, etc. The worst manager you've ever had. A massive storm was approaching, and many were rather concerned about it, such as when the news advises viewers to stay at home when other companies close, etc. Thus, it was up to her to decide whether to close our store or keep it open. Naturally, she left it unlocked. Just half of our planned employees showed up because schools were closed. The remaining employees called in, and she called her favorites to let them know they weren't required to come in. She begins to yell at us, threatening to write us all up, etc., as the 5 of us that showed up were standing there watching out the front windows. There were 0 customers. We're like, no one's here, all the work is done. We're watching the wind bend the trees over and worried about if we are safe / will be able to get home. We hear an extremely loud smashing sound at this point. Kala-chunk, 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 wham! When the building's industrial air conditioner blew off. It appeared as though it flew into the parking lot after rolling along the roof directly onto her vehicle. It was almost unbelievably wonderful. Dead center, completely destroyed her automobile. And the only reason it happened was because she parked directly in front of the building against our express instructions not to do so. Our vehicles were parked at the farthest section of the parking lot. It was subsequently discovered that her car was not fully paid for, that it was some ridiculously costly BMW or whatever, and that her insurance did not pay for the damage because it was an act of God. I was employed at this upscale department shop by the sea in this upscale town. An extremely pompous girl and her boyfriend entered the store on a busy Saturday. She ignored us as we greeted her and even gave my colleague a derogatory glance. She continued to look around the shop before using the changing room to get some clothes. After some while, I hear her and her boyfriend having a passionate talk coming from the booth. I'm watching the boyfriend dash between the booth and a few clothes racks, chasing my colleague and me away while we stayed in the booth and refused assistance, acting as though we were 2 Ebola sufferers. Thus, my colleague and I will keep working and assisting customers. The girl next to me bursts into a furious tirade about how our store / brand really should work on the fitting of our clothes and how we were complete F-ups as I was handling the register. I was really taken off guard, and just as I was about to ask her what the specific issue was, I noticed my colleague staring at the girl and laughing hysterically loudly, tears and all. What had actually happened was that the girl had brought something on that she believed to be a strapless dress. It was not, in fact, a dress. It was a skirt. After trying on every size, the girl lost all patience and started screaming at her boyfriend and us because the frickin' dress didn't fit. With her skirt pulled up to her tees, she made a scene as she left the busy store. Admittedly, after she went, I laughed till I cried. In the past, I worked as a night manager at a pizza business in the downtown area. We were quite literally right around the corner from an immediate rival business. They provided this service all through the night from a carry-out window which they had. We did not, and we were not open for business after 10 p.m. Instead, we offered delivery service only after that time. It's important to note that we had a cordial relationship with the local police department, and that officers from that department frequently sat in our parking lot at night to catch up on paperwork, watch for drunk drivers, and so on. One evening, at around 11:30, a woman and a man began pounding on our door. I answered the door. I greeted them warmly, but yelled quite loudly through the door to let them know that carry-out service ends at 10. While the male just stands there observing and makes an effort to seem hard, the woman goes completely insane and begins yelling and beating the door. In order to actually have a conversation with them, I ask one of the other workers to keep an eye on me in case the situation gets worse, then I exit the building by the side door on the opposite side. This woman has completely gone nuclear at this point, shrieking and using foul language. I wait for her to finish, and then I tell her that it was probably our neighbor next door with the carryout window who took her order if she called and placed it in. In response to the accusation that I'm calling her stupid, I urge her to check her phone and give me the number that she called. She responds with, "I don't have to. I know. I called y'all and you took my order." At this point, I advised her that there is no way, not even remotely possible, that I would take a carryout order after we had closed for the day. At this point, the other man joins in and adopts a very combative stance and tone toward me. He tells me that I better let them in and get their food. I responded with a resounding nay. At this point, the man pushes me, which causes me to stumble back approximately 3 feet. He then starts to swing at me but misses, and I graciously repay the favor by connecting with him and knocking him to the ground. Around the same moment that the woman is making an attempt to rush me, there's a sound that goes whoop whoop, and the blue lights start flashing behind them. This does not prevent them from continuing to attempt to assault me, but the 2 uniformed police officers that just so happen to pull up at that moment take care of it very swiftly. The 2 people have been handcuffed and placed in the cars, the officers have been given a copy of the security tape, and I ask the officer that I'm talking to if, for the sake of curiosity, he might possibly try to convince her to tell him the phone number that she called. Another police car arrives, and both of the people are handcuffed and placed in the cars. He then leads me back outside to the car she's in, and for some reason, manages to convince her to proceed with this. She recites the number while looking at me and speaking with such venom and animosity that it makes my skin crawl. "Blank blank 7272, you stupid effing honky." I give her a friendly grin and tell her, "Our phone number is blank blank 3030. Domino's Pizzas are named. You can reach Papa John's at the above number. Because of this, the number 7272 can be written as Papa." What do you consider to be the most troublesome aspect of your HOA? I just recently purchased my second home, which is not in an HOA, after 30 years in my first home in a townhouse complex where there was an HOA. I will never deal with an HOA again. It wasn't too bad in the early years when the homes are first built and everything was new and all the units were occupied by the original owners. Back then, the worst of it was all the sticklers to the laws not allowing anyone to do remotely change anything that was visible on the exterior. I added a kitty door at the bottom of my front door and caught H for that, but this was the extent of the trouble I had. Over the years, however, it did start to become a nightmare. The first big issue was that people were coming into the complex at night to raid the trash cans for recyclables. So they decided to gate off the entire complex to keep people out. In order to cut costs, they decided to only install a phone at one of the 2 gates on opposite ends of the complex and on different streets. Because more people from the opposite side of the complex than from my side happened to be at the association meeting where they voted, they naturally voted to put the only phone on their side. For decades to come, it became very difficult to get anything delivered on my side of the complex, even if explicit instructions were given to go to the gate on the other street. Until mobile phones became more commonplace, even something as simple as ordering pizza delivery became problematic. Next, the big issue became parking spots. In addition to the 2-car garages that all units were built with, there are multiple parking lots throughout the complex which originally could be used by guests or residents. In the early years, there was no problem, and there was always ample street parking available as well. After the gates went in, the street parking became less accessible, and there were more residents than before due to owners either renting their homes or individual rooms out or using the garage for storage rather than parking their cars. It became more difficult to find free parking spaces, so the HOA decided to make all the parking lots guest parking only, keep a list of all residents' cars, and fine any resident who parked in the guest parking spaces. This quickly became an all-out war between the residents who would get fined and then retaliate by reporting other residents for any little issue they could. What used to be a nice, friendly little neighborhood became ugly and paranoid and distrustful. Eventually, it got so bad that the HOA decided to individually rent out the former guest parking spaces to the individual residents, but only to owners in good standing, current with their monthly HOA dues. This happened right as the economy and real estate market had crashed in 2008 and many residents were unemployed or underwater on their mortgage, and many did not qualify for getting parking spaces. I got one, and then eventually a second after somebody else defaulted on theirs, which happened to be next to mine and right in front of my home, which was great, but all those who couldn't get one hated me, and the situation has otherwise not changed for more than a decade since. I used to be on the HOA board and regularly attended all meetings and votes trying to do my part. However, because my mother originally purchased the property and then turned it over to me a year and a half later when my grandparents both passed away and she moved into their house, my name was never on the title. Even at the very beginning when my mother lived there, she was never able to go to HOA functions, and I was given her vote by proxy, legally documented since 1988. 20 years later, despite being the most active and longest-standing member of the HOA board and never missing a single mortgage or HOA payment, I was removed due to the technicality of not being the one on the title. The HOA president has been the same person for over 20 years. She's an elderly African-American Muslim woman. Why mention her ethnicity or religious persuasion? What's the relevance of that? She plays those cards for everything they're worth and seems to have a giant chip on her shoulder about it. As a result, the rest of the HOA are afraid to speak out against her opinions and go along with whatever she says, apparently out of fear of being called racist, ageist, or anti-Muslim. Many have told me so in private. Even now, I'm afraid to even type this, but the truth is the truth. She is an unintelligent crackpot on a power trip who cares more about keeping the situation under her own control rather than act responsibly and maintain what we have all invested in. I spoke out against her and got removed from the board for it. Our association dues had not been raised since 1988, and the association had mounting debt as a result after numerous issues with termite infestations and damage done by trees that grew dramatically bigger over the decades, and I was trying to argue that the responsible thing to do was increase the dues to cover the costs and properly maintain our homes and investments. Away with you, responsible and reasonable board member, we'll have none of that! I remain convinced that the main reason I was able to get a second parking space to rent, besides being one of the people championing the change to rent them out in order to get more funds into the hemorrhaging HOA account, was because the woman managing the HOA, a separate company, was desperate to keep me involved. She pleaded with me to get my mother to sign over the house to me so that I would be on the title and able to rejoin the board. She said that I was the one voice of reason and that she feared how badly things were going to fall apart without me involved. As a result, the HOA is still struggling financially and the complex is going to S in a state of disrepair. I was the last of the original residents, and all of the original owners have either sold their properties or are renting them out. The current crowd of residents are mostly renters who don't give a D about the properties. A large number of units that ended up in foreclosure after 2008 were bought up by foreign investors who rent out their units and have multiple votes on the board. They finally raised the dues just recently, but not significantly enough. I have since paid off the mortgage in full, and my mother is signing over the property to me, but I want nothing to do with the HOA at this point. I purchased a beautiful mid-century modern home in a nicer area and have moved there with my fiancé and stepchildren. I'm keeping the townhouse to renovate and rent out, which should cover about half of my new mortgage. I would never consider a property in an HOA again. I used to live in an area with the typical effing N-Power architectural committee. On one side of the house was a huge cedar tree. I had to get a variance to build my studio on the other side of the tree. They originally wanted me to cut the tree down. Fast forward a year, I cleaned the little area up and turned it into a kind of beer garden. There was even a little hollow place in the tree that I put a bistro table and a couple chairs. I wanted to put a privacy fence about 50 feet long between my garden and the road. ACC said hard no. Privacy fence can only be 25 feet long. Okay, back to the drawing board. There's no rule against enclosing an area. Okay, so my new plan is to build a fence from the house all the way to the end of the studio. This is about 150 feet. I go to the board and get rejected again. They say I was trying to circumvent the rules. I said, they're your rules. I have to go to a regular board meeting and get yet another ruling. They agreed with me. So I built this huge long fence that nobody really wanted just to satisfy their stupid effing rules. I attended quite a few board meetings and saw no end to this kind of D-bag behavior. In the end, they made some really bad decisions and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and wound up losing in state Supreme Court. Guys, thank you for all the support and likes. Subscribe to the channel if you're not subscribed yet. See you next time.